Family disputes can make us feel isolated and vulnerable. Maybe you're going through a divorce or a legal dispute about your kids. Perhaps you've spent hours on Google or have even posted anonymously on Facebook to see what others have to say. But are you getting the actual information and support that you're looking for? Our podcast, Legal Lounge, aims to dispel misinformation and downright bad legal information to empower anyone with questions about their family, their children, their finances, their marriage, and the law. As a team focused exclusively on family law matters, we aim to help listeners not only with the information they need, but also with the hope that their situation has a solution. Short disclaimer, please note this podcast is for educational purposes only, and the information should not be relied upon as legal advice or for legal purposes. Hi, my name is Teresa Vieira. I am attorney and founder of Modern Legal, and I am here with a colleague of mine who I love having in-depth conversations with, which we ultimately have after enduring these tough cases and the challenges they present. So I'll let her introduce herself.
Hey, I'm Tiffany. I have been part of the team for a few years now and finding my way through all of the crazy that is family law. So
it's so true. I was going to say family law is its own unique beast. On the legal side, a lot of attorneys either love it because we all are a little off in that regard. Something crazy
fair.
about us.
It's pretty fair.
And then there's attorneys that won't touch family law with a 10-foot pole.
Yes, absolutely. Run from it at all costs.
Exactly. So what was it that actually brought you into family law?
So I've always really liked being around people. Like whatever I'm doing, it's got to be impacting or affecting somebody. Otherwise, it feels kind of like a waste. Mm-hmm. And I started doing a lot of work with kids and families that had gone through difficult situations, and they kept hitting roadblocks up to a certain point, and it usually dealt with the legal system. And I knew that I wanted to be able to help them get over that too. And so it's just kind of been there for years now. Yeah. And I wouldn't do anything else.
Yeah. And I feel like the legal system was built in a very adversarial way. Mm-hmm. And yet we want to subject our families to find resolution through this adversarial system.
Right. But remain civil, which doesn't sound like it works together.
Yeah.
So we've been working out different ways to actually make that possible.
Yeah.
Which those are the things that I like to utilize more than having to go through litigation.
Especially when there's children involved.
Absolutely, when children are involved.
I'm fascinated whenever judges hear the mudslinging and everything that has gone bad and how the other parent is a bad parent because of XYZ. Mm-hmm. But then the very next day, they're expected to co-parent.
Right. Like, okay, I know you all have said all the most horrible things about each other, but now that that's all finished, go be best buddies.
Yeah. Have fun at the game.
Yes.
Right.
Be together all the time for the kids, and it won't be a problem.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's still pretty raw. I can't do that yet.
Yeah. So I think a great topic to go through is what are some of the family planning tools that the legal system provides?
So I like to say the law, thankfully, has given a lot of avenues for you to use, almost like insurance policies. So whether it's figuring out, hey, what are we going to do before we get married, like in a prenup? Or if you decide, I know I'm never going to get married, so to speak, but I want to be with you for a long time. Let's get some things on paper in those situations. That's a no-nup, as it's apparently been called these days. Or, hey, we didn't get around to it before we got married, but we still want to do it. Then let's do a postnup. And I know a lot of those get a lot of bad raps, but they really shouldn't. It's just like an insurance policy you put on your house. You hope you never have to use it. But if you do have to, you're glad it's there.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah. I find it interesting how emotional there is a reaction to specifically the prenup, because it's done before the date of the marriage. Mm-hmm. And it goes through the way that the couples will own property, possibly bring up spousal support issues like alimony, and if there's going to be a waiver. And people get very, very emotional.
Oh yeah, they're like, "What? So you're planning on this to fail?" And it's like, no, no, no. I don't want it to fail, but I also don't want the mudslinging
Yeah.
if something were to go wrong. It's
Yeah.
like you don't have to come to us when the house is on fire. Actually, we'd prefer that you came before it was on fire, really. It's a lot easier. You have a lot more options in front of you.
Yeah.
And that's what those types of things do.
Yeah.
Same thing when you think about kids. Maybe you need to have a parenting agreement so that
Yeah.
everybody knows when you're going to see the kids or how you're sharing time. Those things are important. And that's really all that the kids want to know. When am I seeing mom? When am I seeing dad?
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. And I find it, well, especially on our side, because we see a lot of people going through divorce and a lot of people saying, well, I didn't know, we didn't talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the discussion surrounding a prenup, even if you don't sign one, force the couple to have those really important conversations.
Yes.
I think it's important to know, okay, how are we going to handle the finances? Because a prenup can literally state this is how finances will be handled during the relationship.
Yeah.
Even a divorce never occurs.
Absolutely. Same thing. Like let's take, for example, somebody who finds love later in life, or
Mhm.
maybe this isn't their first marriage, but they have things from the life before. Maybe you have children from a previous relationship, or you have property or things that you've kind of built up for yourself from a previous marriage or previous relationship, or just over time. And you want to make sure, for example, that that stuff goes to your children from before and it doesn't get mixed up in everything that's coming after. These types of agreements are going to be really helpful in doing that.
Yeah.
Because if you leave it to the state, things are going to happen that you don't necessarily intend.
Yeah. I find it interesting, you bring up children, and, I founded a law firm, and, well, I'll be honest, that law firm is also one of my babies.
Mhm. Yeah.
So the same thing applies to businesses. Even if you're a solopreneur or haven't even incorporated your business, the legal rights of ownership to that business literally change overnight when you get married.
Yep.
And I'm fascinated about how many people are not even aware of that small factor that we see every day as family law attorneys.
Yes, absolutely. Like it's interesting if you think about marriage as a contract in and of itself. As soon as that thing comes into being, everything that exists after that, that contract, that marriage has a right to some portion of that.
Yep.
So if you want to make sure that some things stay outside of that, then you've got to have some discussions. You've got to have an insurance policy.
Yeah. I was going to say, so I have a prenup, and it's interesting for my business. It's going to be mine. My prenup says it.
Yeah.
While we're married, should we get divorced? But go one step further. What if I mess up? What if I have a business that fails?
Mm-hmm.
Well, now my spouse is protected. And that's really important because, marriage can create a lot of headaches, but it can also create a lot of protections. And so can the law.
Yeah. At the end of it, that is the crux of what we're doing. How do we take the situation that you're in and give you and your loved ones as many protections as possible? And in order to do that, you do have to have conversations. Some of those conversations are really easy. Some of them are tough, but you still have to have them.
Yeah.
You can't run from them because then they're just going to come up later and you're going to be like, oh, crap.
Yeah.
I really should have did that a while ago.
Well, or they come up once the mudslinging started.
Yeah.
You're sleeping in separate bedrooms or someone has actually moved out.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly, especially in North Carolina, because all that is required in North Carolina is that the parties reside under separate roofs. And that's your separation for legal purposes.
Yep.
And suddenly you're talking about, oh, is a lawsuit going to be filed? Oh, are they going to ask for half of my retirement account? All because a lot of these conversations weren't had earlier in the relationship.
Exactly. And that just adds to all of the stress that you're already feeling. And if you can avoid all of that, like let's say you already have to go through the stress of, hey, this isn't working out. We are going to part ways. But you know how your finances are going to go. You know that, okay, I'm going to leave with all of my retirement and X, Y, and Z, and we don't have to have this argument.
Yeah.
We can go ahead and start healing and dealing with what's happened and give each other space.
Yeah, I've had that case more than once where the parties entered into a prenuptial agreement or premarital agreement is what we legally call it in North Carolina. And they truly went through premarital counseling and they gave it a good faith effort. And at times it wasn't even the person who wanted the prenup who now is calling for the divorce. But I can't tell you how much comfort as a family law attorney I get when I'm like, oh, there is a prenup and it's well written. If it's a well
That's
written
the other
prenup.
part. Say
Yes.
that part again.
A well written prenup is what I'm looking for.
Yes. Yeah.
Because a well written prenup already preconceives all the problems that create delays and obstacles in a divorce.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I had a case relatively recently where my client was very emotional because they didn't want the divorce, but I reminded them, you have a prenup. So all that stuff you're reading online that it's going to take months, years, it's going to be a headache, it's going to be very emotional.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it's not for you.
Right.
Because we had this prenup done years ago.
Right.
And although the relationship is something my client still wanted,
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't frustrated by the prospect of not knowing, okay, who's going to get what? How is my retirement going to be distributed?
Mm-hmm.
And all those other concerns that come up in a divorce.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that is when our role is most important, being able to kind of explain that to people from the very beginning and say, listen, I know that this might be difficult right now, but let's get through the hard stuff now so that if you have to use it, if it becomes necessary, you don't have those headaches. You can actually breathe a little bit.
Yeah.
And so the comparisons that you're getting from friends or other loved ones that have gone through it, you can say, well, that's not my experience. And you're going to be so thankful that you're going to be able to say that.
There's no conversation more romantic than discussing a prenup with your partner, right? Okay, maybe the song for your first dance does a bit more in the romance department. Speaking of emotions, though, the prenup is a very legal document that everyone has a very emotional reaction to. Many people avoid the prenup conversation because they feel it is an indication that the marriage will fail. But here's the truth. Half of all marriages already fail, regardless of whether the spouses had the prenup conversation or not. If you or someone you care about is getting married, would knowing what marriage involves legally be important? What about having the difficult conversations surrounding finances, career aspirations, and pursuing parenthood prior to the wedding date? If you are looking to build a solid foundation for your marriage, or you want the same for someone you care about, we are here to help you learn more about prenups from a position of knowledge, not emotion. To learn more about family law from a legal professional, book a consultation with a member of the Modern Legal team by visiting our website, emailing us, or calling us at 704-286-6302. Check out the information about Modern Legal services at modernlegalnc.com. We hear a lot that I want my day in court. And I'm just like, but do you?
Yeah.
Because, in different counties, it depends, but there are a lot of judges that may have never been working in the family law field before they became a judge, maybe learning with your specific case, and maybe the first child custody trial that they had. There's not necessarily an intensive course, more than, a week or so that is focused on family law issues. But go one step further, there's also a lot of gray area when it comes to family law. And so if you're able to work out the details with a loved one before you even get married or have these tough discussions, then you don't have to be as concerned with what the state says how things should be.
Right. Exactly. Like I like to tell people all the time, listen, judges, they have especially here in Mecklenburg County, there is a short amount of time that they have to really get into what is going on with your case. They're going to end up missing things that you think are important because this is your baby. This is your family. These are your finances. The judge doesn't have that kind of connection to that. So they have to make decisions that by and large would operate regardless of whose family is in front of them. So you lose control the minute you step into that courtroom. And I don't know about you, but I like having some control.
Yes.
So if I'm able to kind of put my own parameters on
Yeah.
things, I feel a lot better.
I mean, go one step further. Judges also have to stay within very strict boundaries.
Yes.
It's fascinating when I sit down with a client and they're like, well, can we do XYZ? Yes, we can.
Mhm.
A judge cannot.
Right.
We can get very creative. We meaning our side and the opposing side,
Mhm.
or other spouse, if you want to say it that way.
Mhm.
And a judge cannot, because they are bound strictly by the law.
Mhm.
And oh my goodness, I cannot say often enough how many times someone goes into a courtroom thinking they're going to win. They walk out thinking they've lost. But at the end of the day, everyone's lost
Mhm.
because, man, that was just a war zone in there.
Yeah,
How can anyone think they've won after losing everything?
exactly. Exactly.
At least
So
it feels like, yeah.
yeah, so let's mitigate that. Let's try and keep as much outside of that arena as possible.
Yeah. And actually, that brings me to the other part of family planning because, on one hand, we're trying to make sure families are protected from honestly the law and how strict it can be.
Correct.
But I would say that also applies to, estate planning and their life itself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the law has certain defaults in place. So you have spent your life working and collecting things that are important to you, whether that be businesses or family heirlooms, whatever it is. Once you pass, if you don't have instructions on where that stuff is supposed to go, the state has a default set of instructions.
Mhm.
And maybe it goes to the brother that you haven't talked to in 20 years and you don't have a good relationship. But if you don't have any other instructions, that may be where that stuff goes.
Yeah.
And so the will, for example, can give you the ability to lay out where you want your things to go.
Yeah.
But for me, I think sometimes more importantly is laying out what you want to happen, who you want acting on your behalf if you're not able to make certain decisions. And
Yeah.
that's where powers of attorney come in.
Yeah.
And those are extremely important. And I think sometimes they get forgotten about.
And I would actually argue they're probably more important because we're actually more likely to become disabled than we
Mhm.
are to die.
Exactly.
Luckily, fortunately,
Yeah.
not for like.
Yeah.
But I almost feel like people may, handwrite a will. Okay, well, this is what will happen if I die, and
Mhm.
completely forget what happens if you're in that car accident.
Exactly.
What happens if there's a serious injury where you just cannot express your needs?
Exactly. Especially when you have kids. Like, let's talk about the fact that, people go on, anniversary trips and things like that, where both parents are away. If, God forbid, worse thing happens and both of them become unable to make decisions, we now have questions around, okay, who's supposed to be taking care of my kids right now? That's really important. Those are things you can cover in a power of attorney.
Yeah. Thinking broad scope here is as attorneys, we want our clients to be protected all the way around. So
Yes.
if the parties do have a prenuptial agreement or a postnuptial agreement, same thing
Mhm.
signed after the date of marriage,
Yep.
a will, maybe even a trust, we want
Mhm.
all of these documents to work together.
Exactly. Because once you start having documents that are fighting each other, you are right back into that arena because then somebody else is going to have to step in and say, okay, well, which one's controlling?
Yep.
What are we going to do now that things aren't matching up? So you may say, well, I did that will years ago. Okay, well, make sure you bring it in so we make sure that what we're doing now doesn't go against what you were doing then.
Yeah.
And so you just want to have checks and balances on all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you don't have the right checks and balances, a court is going to say, okay, if we're confused, we're going to apply the state's laws.
Exactly. We're just going to toss all that out. Never mind. Forget about it. Just use ours.
Yep. Just use ours. Just use our system. And and I appreciate the law and I appreciate the state having those protections in place. Right.
Yeah.
Like the spouse will share to make sure the spouse is taken care for if their significant other passes away.
Yes.
The law is meant to protect us.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times those protections are not the ones that we would actually want.
Exactly. And these things, these ways that you can plan around different parts of your family give you the ability to put in place what you would want protection from or how you would want to be protected.
Other thing here is coming back to the well-written piece. We would want that will to be well-written. We would want that power of attorney, that trust, prenup, postnup to be well-written.
Mm-hmm. And have a really good idea about what it is that you're covering. Because as soon as you sign something, as soon as your John Hancock is on that, that's it. Like you have to either go through, especially with wills, you can redo it. But if you've already passed or if something has come in to where now the last one you had is what's in place, if that's not actually expressing what you wanted it to express, we're stuck.
Yep.
We're stuck.
Yep.
Especially with like prenups, postnups, parenting agreements. You really have to make sure that you're aware of what it is that you're agreeing to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not only what you're aware to what you're agreeing to, but also that everything you're agreeing to is actually written, not just in your head.
Right. Or you've written something, or you and the other parent or the other spouse have talked, and you've come to this agreement that, oh, well, we said that we were going to do this. That's great. I need it written down though, so that we can guarantee that it happens.
Your piece of not legal advice, but your piece of advice is
yeah, always have it written.
Have it written
always
down.
Always have it written.
And in detail. I know, and I'm sure some of my clients can testify to this is, oh, Teresa, that'll never happen. Or, we have this understanding. And
yeah, we have this understanding. We hear that a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's when you're not angry. That's when you're not hurt. And then when you're angry or you're hurt, that understanding, you get amnesia or just say, nope, never mind, not doing it.
Yeah. And you go back to an agreement. And if the agreement isn't detailed and well written, then it could go either way. And if there's a gray area, I tell my clients, it's likely not going to be interpreted by a judge in your favor.
Exactly.
Especially if you make adjustments to it, which we are all about parents and spouses or ex-spouses working together to work through issues. That's not what I'm trying to work against here. It's more that, from our perspective as attorneys, we say, okay, you have an agreement, make sure it's in writing. Because then you can say, hey, judge, if you ever are in a courtroom, we had this agreement. And if it's signed and notarized, then that's what's binding.
Exactly.
Not this understanding.
Right. Well, we talked about it 3 months ago and everybody was all good.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Doesn't be like, I can't do anything about that.
When it comes to divorce, I hear that a lot because a lot of people get married not knowing how their legal rights change and the obligations they assume. So, for example, when you get married, unless you have a prenup stating otherwise, you do assume the financial responsibility for your spouse. What does that mean? It means you owe a duty to your other spouse, especially if you become the primary income earner, right? And if you become the primary income earner, and especially if it's by agreement, right? The couple decides that one spouse stays home to take care of the kids or the house, or, for a number of reasons, you just have an at-home spouse and a working spouse. Well, even if you had the understanding that should you separate both of you go back to work, that's not necessarily binding or a waiver of spousal support should a divorce occur. Same thing when it comes to bank accounts. I mean, yeah, the bank account could be in your name. The car could be in your name or their name.
That doesn't matter at first. Doesn't matter.
Do you have a prenup stating it?
Right. No. Well, okay. It's the marriage is the owner.
Yep.
And now the judge gets to decide, okay, who gets what part of this? Who gets this part of the marriage? Who gets that part of the marriage? If you think about it like that, it becomes very different. I don't actually care whose name is on the thing.
Yeah. I've had discussions where couples decide not to do a prenup. And I don't know if I've had the same discussion about wills. Generally, people know that they want wills.
Yeah, there's not as much fight
Yeah.
about wills.
Yeah, because everyone knows they're going to die one day.
Correct.
How morbid it is.
Yes.
It is.
They still don't like having the conversation, but there's not as much of a fight about a will.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not as emotional other than it being a morbid topic.
Right.
But I think it does depend truly, with these family planning tools that the law provides, how much do you want the state or the government to determine your future, your financial future, the future of your children, the future of everything that surrounds your legal rights as a person, as a family member, as a spouse, as a worker, as a member of our community, and how much do you want to have a say in that? And I think if you want to have more of a say, simply put, you can utilize these tools, a prenup, postnup, separation agreement, parenting agreement, a will, a trust, a power of attorney, if you want more control and authority to route these decisions to those of your own making.
Exactly.
And when I say you, I do mean especially in hopefully a happy marriage.
Yeah.
That is you meaning the two
joint.
of you.
Exactly. It's the both of you. You both have a say in this. And that's the thing. Like all of these planning tools, they do require agreement, which means I can't force you into it. They can't force you into it. You both have to come and say, yes, I'm saying that I'm okay with this being how this is handled. And sometimes I think our clients every now and then they're like, well, can't we just say? I'm like, well, you can propose it.
Yeah, exactly.
But I can't make somebody put their signature to it.
Yeah. So like coming back to that emotional response that people have to the prenup, they forget the second word, prenuptial agreement.
Exactly.
So it has to be agreed upon.
As opposed to what comes out of court, which would be an order, which means they're telling you have no say in this.
And they, not the other spouse, not your mom, but a judge who has never lived a day in your life.
Yep.
Never lived under your roof or with your kids. A stranger.
Yeah.
Telling you what you are going to do with your money and your children.
Exactly.
Oof.
Yeah, you can. I'll pass on that every time. every time. Let me be a part of this decision. And thankfully, because honestly, the court doesn't want to see you either.
Yeah,
they would love if nobody came in. Just everybody, please, just go use these ways to deal with this, so that I don't have to do it.
Yeah.
Don't make me do this.
Especially in Mecklenburg County here in North Carolina, it's we have the 8th floor.
Yes.
The 8th floor. It's all family law. It is some of the busiest courtrooms in our courthouse are the family courts. Child custody is most often the most litigated matter in a courthouse.
Yes.
Child custody. Now I'm going off on a tangent. Child custody is the only legal cause of action you can litigate more than once, right? Because you get charged with a crime. Guilty, not guilty, double jeopardy.
Yep.
Protects you. You can't be tried again for that same crime. Whereas children, their needs change.
All the time.
All the time.
So the court's like, listen, you bring that back as much as you have to. Are there some rules around it? Yes, of course. But yes, you can come back here whenever you need to.
Yeah.
If there's an issue that needs to be addressed. Absolutely.
And the needs of a child change, right? 3-year-olds needs different from a 6-year-olds, from a 9-year-olds, teenagers.
Yes.
And these are all factors that a court will consider and possibly have to address time and time again. But think about the toll that has. I think when we talk about a prenup or we talk about a parenting agreement or a will, I think a lot of people, and probably because of the disconnection they feel, is that, okay, this is legal, this is planning, this is very official. But then they don't think about, okay, what toll will this have on my children if I do or do not have these plans in place?
Yes. The amount of conflict that can come is going to greatly impact what your children remember, what they feel, how they process it. If you can avoid conflict, you should. for yourself, of course, but really for your kids because
And
they're going to remember that.
I'm going to just point one tidbit out that Tiffany is very humble in admitting. She also has a master's in social work, right?
Yes.
And so she literally knows, more so than me, she's very smart, that the negative impact on children of trauma just ripples.
Yes. Yeah. And it can come out in all different kinds of ways, things that you don't necessarily put together as, oh, that's because they've experienced this thing. And sometimes I think trauma gets a little misconstrued. They don't always have to be the most dramatic, awful things that could have ever happened. It's literally something that is more difficult for them to handle than they have tools for at the time. That's probably the easiest way that I can think of to define what trauma is.
Yeah.
It's something that's happened that is more than you can handle at the moment.
Yeah.
And so constant conflict between two people that they love, especially when they're really little, they don't know how to handle that.
Yeah.
And it's going to take some time for them to start processing or putting words to what's happening. And so we also have a responsibility to curtail that or shield them from that as much as possible. And that's really why I like parenting agreements, because you can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say, as kind of a closing note here is that the more tools that we can use to protect spouses, but also protect our future, our children, I think is the most important part, is that all of these tools can be utilized to some extent to make sure we are fostering healthy relationships and healthy families, even if that means a child is not in the same household every night.
Yeah, it's still a healthy relationship. For some, it's healthier that way than if you stayed in the relationship.
Yeah.
And that's what's most important. That's why I got in it.
Yeah.
That's why I stay in it.
Yeah. That's why we deal with the crazy cases. But at the end of the day, when we know our clients are in a better situation, the children are in a better situation, that's why we can most nights sleep well.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Tiffany, so much.
No problem.
Joining me here in the Legal Lounge, and we'll see the rest of you next time. Thank you for taking the time to listen to our discussion. To learn more about me and the Modern Legal team, go to our website, modernlegalnc.com, or check out the links in our show notes to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. You can also call us at 704-286-6302. If you have been intrigued by the conversation and would like us to continue our discussions, please subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review. See you next time.